So when we first encounter this timeless, eternal sense of awareness, it can be surprising. And for some people, it might have this just stark beauty of sort of crystalline clarity without form. And for other people, it might feel more like an absence, not quite knowing what it is. Well, in either case, we don't know what it is, but when it's seen just as an absence, it can be a little off-putting, right? Like it's maybe not what we first signed up for. But in either case, in almost all instances, what is seen at first is the whole picture in one sense. You can't see part of awareness because awareness is inherently whole. But when we come back into the normal thinking mind state, it may feel distant or incomprehensible, or we're not quite sure what that was. And so the learning just to be in that state of awareness and resting in that state as that state, and being comfortable doing that, and allowing the magnificence of that to be revealed to our more human form over a period of time. Just takes some time. Doesn't happen overnight. So there's the paradox right there. It's we talked, I believe, a couple of weeks ago about being and becoming. So in one sense, the awareness already complete, doesn't need any improvement, already full, already done, always has been. But the body-mind is, with its greater density of form, just takes some time to get on board with all of that. And there's a certain amount of resistance to doing that, just because of our beliefs. There's nothing inherent in the body-mind that would do that, other than our beliefs that we have about who we are, and a resistance to allowing ourselves to discover who we really are. So that can take some time. So that's the paradox of it. I was once watching a dynamite blast, and from about a mile away, it was a huge blast. And when the blast went off, it just spewed large rock for several hundred yards. It was just immense. But from a mile away, it was all happening in silence, because it took about 5 seconds for the sound of the blast to reach where I was standing from a mile away. So that's sort of the difference between seeing something immediately and then taking a greater amount of time to penetrate the denser level of these body minds. So what can be seen in a moment through awakening might take the body some time, not just 5 seconds, but maybe 5 years. Maybe, as they recommend in Zen, maybe 10 to 15 years to fully acclimate to that new perspective. And I would say that's about right. That can sound disheartening when you first hear it, but when we have recognized what we truly are, everything's good. Everything's good. There's still more to learn, but there's also a sense of, and it's also fine and complete now. So again, a paradox. It's complete. Our identity has been settled. There's no more questions about what that is. There may be, the sense of seeking out of a sense of not enough. That's dropped away, and there can be just this very comforting sense of being at home, finally coming home. So all of that's true and cannot really be forgotten. And yet at the same time, paradoxically enough, again, the ego can quietly slip in, and we find ourselves caught in its embraces once again. And we find that really surprising. But it's actually good to know that that's not only possible, but very likely. It would be very unlikely that we would wake up and the ego would be just simply down for the count and never to be seen again. That would be very, very unusual. So it's good to know that that can happen. There's also very commonly this sense of I had it, I got it, and then I lost it. Back and forth. Moments of deep clarity where it seems impossible to not see it in the future. And then sometime in the future, we wondered where it went. So there's both that can be happening, the clear knowing of our identity, and yet this movement of ego returning, a sense of I got it and I lost it. So there's also the possibility that if we had learned or believed that enlightenment was the finish line, that once there, everything, it was done, right? Happily ever after, eternal bliss. But that's not true, actually. It would be more true to say that the experience of awakening is actually the beginning of the true spiritual journey rather than the end. It's the end of one phase of the journey, you could say, but certainly the beginning of another. And the beginning of the other is how to learn to live from this awakeness that we realize that we are. So that awakeness can be noticed, can be felt, can be experienced. It is not knowable in the usual sense of the word. It will ever be mysterious in a certain sense, but that doesn't mean that it's not intimate, that it's not, that it can't be experienced. It can certainly be experienced, and it's felt as the most intimate possible thing. And yet it will forever remain mysterious because it's not a thing to be looked at, grasped, understood. But it can be experienced, it can be lived from, and that's the whole, you could say, second part of the journey, returning full circle. So during this period, it can also be confusing because many of the things that we were used to doing or activities that we used to like change. So we can find ourselves feeling a little odd having a conversation with people. Suddenly, even though we might be a good conversationalist, suddenly we um, feel like what we say feels clumsy, or we don't know what to say, or it doesn't make sense to say the things that we used to say. Um, or maybe we can't find the same juice doing the things that used to give us juice, the same motivation, the same interests. Maybe our friends aren't the same as the friends that we used to have, not out of any kind of meanness, but just because um, relating in a certain way just didn't um, seem to make as much sense as maybe it once did. When we seek a different kind of relationship, maybe something with more authenticity, or maybe we just seek, being alone, whereas we never did that before, and that can feel strange. So there's a lot of new things happening after what might be called an additional awakening. So it's a little bit like being born, right? There's life in the womb, and then we're born, and who we were before birth and who we are after we were born are the same being. We haven't, our essential self is still the same, and yet we're faced with having to learn a whole different um, ways of interacting with our environment. We have to learn to stand up. We have to learn to walk. We have to learn all kinds of things that we didn't have to know um, previously. So it can feel almost like that, like just like, I'm not sure quite how to do this. It feels a little strange. So that may be surprising too. We may have thought that, once there was enlightenment, we'd just be really good at doing everything, but it doesn't quite feel like that. Again, there's this awkwardness, but there's also just this deep sense of everything's good, everything's really good, and so that's a little odd as well. Just these two very different movements, but they're coming from different places. One's coming from knowing what we essentially are, and the other one is the body, mind, trying to figure out what just happened. Right? And the body mind will try to sort of pull our attention back into its domain. And this movement back it's almost like there used to be some ads that Disney put out, and I think the person in the ad was a football star. They just won the Super Bowl, and the ad says, "Well, what are you going to do next?" And they said, "Go to Disneyland." Right. So this is sort of what the mind does, where you've just been given the keys to the sanctuary, and then the mind comes back in and says, "Yeah, but what's next?" And that's it. There's just a certain momentum behind that. This momentum of maybe years and years, probably decades of wanting something from life, seeking, whether in the worldly world or in the spiritual world, same seeking essentially. So there's a certain momentum around that, and when suddenly there's no reason to seek anything, the thinking mind can come back in and says, well, now that you're awake, why not enjoy, an extra serving of ice cream, or what, the next, enhance it even more, and that's just the egoic mind, just wanting more, always more. So the question is, well, given all this confusing activity in the midst of a deep awakening, where everything's just fine, what do I do? And I mean, the short answer is just, spend time loitering in that awareness. Just be with it, rest in it, as it, nothing to do. This is where the Advaita instruction of nothing to do, nowhere to go actually makes total sense, because it feels like everything is done, everything is complete. The world is still the same. My whatever issues I might be having that I have to deal with, and some unpaid bill or some unresolved situation, those don't disappear overnight, and the world certainly doesn't change. What changes is our perspective, because we can see that the world is as it is. It must be as it is, because that is exactly how it is. And it's not out of a sense of resignation. It's almost out of a recognition of the perfection of that. I know that might sound odd to say, but that's the feeling of it. So what happens is, when we've recognized our true nature, there's a sense that the seeking ceases, just drops away. And there was when I was about 12 years old, in just the town newspaper, they had a little riddle every day. They were really on about my level, 12-year-old. But this one riddle just struck me, and I remember it after all these years. But the riddle was, if you've lost your keys and you're looking for your keys, why are they always in the last place you look? And the answer, of course, is you stop looking after you found your keys, so they're in the last place that you look. And but it's sort of like that with seeking, is when you found and recognize your essential identity, that seeking drops away because you found what you were looking for, right? So it's not like it requires effort to stop seeking any more than it would take effort to stop looking for your keys after you found them. It just doesn't make sense anymore. It doesn't, can't possibly motivate you anymore, so it drops away. The thing is, when seeking drops away, so does the seeker. Because it's really all one movement. There's seeker, we split it up with words and mental images, but there, we talk about the seeker, seeking, and the sought, what we're seeking, the object of our search, right? Noun, verb, object, right? Seeker, seeking, sought. But when one drops away, when seeking drops away, so does the seeker. So does the object of our search. All of it drops away together. So then we're left with, okay, so what do I do, right? It's always been the question before, how do I keep pushing this journey along? Just what's the next step? That psychological movement is why teachings that tell you about the 10 levels or whatever are so entrancing. The mind likes that. Okay, what level am I at? What do I need to do to get to the next one? Right. But when the goal has been reached, it's not really a goal because you were that all along, but when that has been recognized, you're suddenly left with nothing to do. there can be the odds, and sometimes people even say, "Well, then what'll I do with all my spare time?" And it can feel like that, like everything's complete, everything's done. What's the motivation to do anything? There can be that movement, or there can be that movement of the body mind that feels a little restless and a little uncomfortable with that, suddenly finding oneself in that position. In other words, we can either really enjoy it or sort of stress ourselves about it. Okay, so that's sort of the setting for when we, first come into awakeness, right? So, the instruction, the basic instruction, as I said, is just to rest as that awareness. Not nothing else is needed, right? And just allow that to reveal itself more and more. But there are a few things that are helpful instructions, I'd say. And the first one is not to demand the fruits of enlightenment. So by fruits, I just mean, spectacular spiritual revelations, totally quiet mind, all our problems dissolve, perpetually high state, eternal bliss, those kind of perks, right? They may come, but if we're grasping for it, the only thing that is grasping for those experiences is, of course, ego coming back into the picture, with the idea, well, if I'm enlightened, then I ought to be having these experiences as proof of my awakening, right? So this, again, the mind coming back in, wanting to, thinking that it knows what awakeness is, or wanting it to be a certain way. So this awareness, especially when it's first encountered, is you could say almost that it's featureless, like, well, it is formless after all, so it doesn't have the attributes of form other than a knowingness or an aliveness, but it's just that quality as that awareness moves. But in itself, especially when we first encounter it, it can feel more like an absence or an emptiness. It's not that at all, but that's what it can feel like. But we just need a little patience. It's like, awareness can be a little shy that way. She's sort of not willing to take all her clothes off on the first date. And not that there's any kind of armoring there at all, but what's really being asked for is that we allow ourselves to be there naked of concepts. Right? That's what's being asked for. And it's not a technique, right? We're not sort of resting as awareness without a goal, without a desire, as a technique to get to a different place. It's just really really being there without the goal. I mean, the goal and the movement and the wanting is still all coming from our grasping mind. But when we're just resting as that awareness, it is as it is. There's not a goal to it. It's not a technique. It's just resting as awareness, period. That's what it is. But resting as that allows something else. And one of the things that it allows is just to see, give ourselves a chance to see see ever more clearly what that awareness really is, what it feels like, what's the nature of it. Because again, it's not, the awareness is complete, right? But our body's, mind's ability to grasp more fully what that is won't happen overnight. So we just need to spend some time, get to know it. Not know it as an object, but just become familiar with it. Okay, the other thing that we can do is notice the tendency to ask, okay, but what's next? As if this recognition of our fundamental nature as awareness was just, just a quick stop on the road. It's much more than that. There's still more to be seen, but that restlessness of the mind to want to move on to the next step, as if the next step will somehow be more and better, disregards the immensity of the recognition of our essential nature. So it's just necessary just to take our time. The mind just wants something exciting, the next thing. But, excitement can be overrated. Like if you were in a car that was skidding on an icy mountain road, that's exciting, but it's not necessarily something that we would desire, right? And it's almost as if on a cellular level, like almost maybe like coming off an addiction, at a cellular level, it takes a while for the cells to get used to a lower, a less stimulating environment. It's almost if you spend hours a day texting and suddenly you lost your cell phone, there's that anxiousness that if you gave up your cell phone for 2 weeks, it would begin to settle down, more like that. So we can notice this, the body-mind's tendency to react to this sort of remaining at ease, present for this awareness, formless awareness, without attributes. Okay? And so I've talked about this before, but it's good to remember it in these situations. There's several techniques that the body-mind is really good at to distract us from just being present for presence. One is getting sleepy. One is arguing with it. Another is just physical restlessness, jitteriness. So we can just recognize those and see, okay, it's the mind's need to sort of react. Because the mind doesn't like this. The thinking mind and its identity may not understand awareness at all, but it knows what it is. It knows what it is in the sense of it's beyond its grasp. It doesn't actually know what it is at all, but it recognizes a threat to its existence. And so it doesn't mind the spiritual journey. It just doesn't like the destination. Okay, so this movement towards away from this tendency of what's next or more, better or more exciting, is to relax into trusting our awareness, because the tendency might be like, well, if I just don't do anything and just hang out in this awareness, nothing more will happen. But that's not true. What is true is that at this point in the journey, what's no longer needed is all of the efforting that may have gone before. And the territory that we're talking about here tonight is allowing, right? Just allowing the awareness to be as it is, and resting there. Because the awareness knows infinitely better how to navigate this territory than the brain ever will. The brain doesn't know it at all, can't know it, because the brain, as far as we can consciously know of it, deals in concepts, deals in words, deals in ideas. And what we're talking about here in terms of awareness has nothing to do with concepts and ideas and words. So the two are worlds apart. The body-mind can, over time, come more and more into an alignment with this awareness, really dropping down into the role of a very useful servant. But to get there, it has to be willing. We have to be willing to allow it to give up its managerial role. It won't do it willingly. All we can do is see every tendency that it has to hold on to that role and just see it for what it is. Okay, another way, another thing that's useful at this stage is to recognize the possibility of lapsing back into ego. And this is, people can feel like, why is this happening? I was awake, and now I can see that I've been caught up in, my egoic tendencies. It happens frequently. It happens to nearly everyone. I say nearly everyone because it's hard to make absolute statements about life, but nearly everyone. So the sense of lapsing into, an egoic state, it can feel like I've lost my awakeness. But that would be like saying, on a sunny day, and suddenly some clouds roll in, and you can't see the sun anymore. Nobody calls 911 and says the sun is missing. Right? Nobody does that. But when the same thing happens in their spiritual life, they had awareness, and then, then they go to a spiritual teacher and they say, I was aware, I was awake, and then I lost it. And the only question is what was present while they were telling this teacher that they had lost their awareness. It was awareness, right? It was fully present in that moment, and when the person was insisting that they had lost it. So it's like, saying, well, the clouds are proof that the sun has vacated the universe. No, the problem isn't with the awareness at all. The clouds in this case are our beliefs, have just obscured our view of what is always and already present. Right? And we believe the beliefs, and we believe that as long as they're present, awareness is absent. Not so. It's just the next belief, right? So the movement here is, you could call it stabilizing awareness, but it's not really that at all. It's really stabilizing our tendency to be pulled into thought. That's what is really happening. And but I'd suggest that actually has a benefit, because it's almost like we're playing hide and seek with ourselves, right? We hide, hide in our concepts and our beliefs, and then we have to find our way back home again. And we do it again and again. So every time we find our way back home, we sort of, the path gets more well-trodden. So the good news is we're always hiding in the same place. It makes it easier. So each time we find ourselves again, it's like, oh, that's where I'll remember the next time. And then we forget. And then we find our way back. Oh, yeah, that's right. I know. So this movement, we can be discouraged by it, like, like somehow I've gone, taken a spiritual detour, to have gotten lost in my egoic state. But it actually has value because it reminds us again and again that awareness is always present, and we really go looking for it and notice that it's still there, and it's still there the next time, that it's never absent. Eventually we recognize that. Never absent, even while thought is happening. So this movement of I got it and I lost it. I used to work with a friend of mine called Maya, and one day she and I came up with this acronym. It was IGI, ILI, itis. I got it, I lost it, itis. IGI, ILI, itis. Iggy, Ili, Iggy, Ili, itis. Sort of the inflammation of the belief that I lost my awareness. So that's what it is. It's just a belief. It's just like suddenly the cloud of a concept rolls in, obscures the sun, and we believe the sun is missing. Just that. Okay, so it's good to recognize that can happen, often does, and see it as an ability to, an opportunity to learn, to trace our way back to awareness, not as a deficit somehow. Okay, another one is holding on to the experience. Right. So this was advice that I got from Adyashanti, and at the time I didn't really understand it, but the advice was, with awakening, don't try to hold on to it. And it sounds totally counterproductive. You spend decades seeking enlightenment, and then it happens, and every fiber in your body wants to hold on to it, right? And but I remember the teaching. When that shift happened, there's a glorious few days, and then I could feel it, that energetic component of it receding, and I remembered the teaching. I didn't understand it when I heard it, but I remembered it when that energetic component was you could feel it sort of receding, like the tide going out. And you want to hold on to it. You don't want to, you think, I've worked so hard for this. I don't want to just let it go. But somehow, for some reason, I trusted that advice without really understanding it at the time, but not holding on to it, being willing to just let it be, let it recede. And what I realized later was that any holding on to it is just the ego wanting to maintain the experience, and the experience can never be enlightenment. Just experience. What the enlightenment aspect of it is what is present for that awareness, that whatever that experience is. Okay, so holding on to that experience is sort of like if you're let's say you're at a party and everybody's having a good time, maybe a dinner party, everybody's laughing, joking, talking, having a great time, and suddenly someone says, "Oh, aren't we having a great time?" And suddenly everything stops, everybody checks and becomes self-conscious, and then suddenly this, sort of silent blanket descends over the room. Everybody's become self-conscious and not in the flow of that interaction anymore. So when we try to hold on to, grasp, characterize an experience, it's a form of grasping it, and I don't know, experience doesn't like that. It likes the freedom of movement. So anytime we try to hold on to that experience, hold on to the spiritual experience rather than that old worldly experience. It's like, taking a pendulum and insisting that it only swing this way and not the other way. It doesn't do that. It's not natural for it to do that. It's natural for it to move as it will, and it does move. Okay, another piece of advice for this period of acclimatizing to awakeness is not to talk about it. Again, there's this sort of almost overwhelming tendency to tell people about it. Tell your friends, tell your parents or your kids, as a way that they'll understand you at last, and and you'll be the person conveying this road to enlightenment to them. But the reason for this caution not to talk about it is that, especially when it's sort of fresh and tender, that any tendency to talk about it puts it into, conceptualizes it, right? Puts it into words, ideas, which is not it, right? And when it's fresh, it's very easy to get pulled back into concepts or memories of it rather than the lived experience of it. And what has the value is just staying with the lived experience. There's also there's the movement. It can feel like a sense of wanting to be special, to being known as the person that has awakened, so that movement can be suspect, right? The other thing is, if you publicly announce your enlightenment too soon, before it's really stabilized in a way, and then one day this egoic tendency comes back in, and people see you acting like that, then what do? Do you fess up? Do you acknowledge your egoic tendency, or you try to sweep it under the rug and then deal with your inauthenticity? So it's better just to let it unfold at the rate it will. And again, the Zen suggestion is, give it 10 or 15 years, and I'd say that's about right. It's not like you're waiting 10 or 15 years, because all along everything has that sense of completeness, but yet still learning. Still more and more being revealed, and yet at each moment it feels complete. So it doesn't feel like you're waiting 10 or 15 years, but you're just being reserved, let's say, during that time. It's not like you never say anything about it, but be really careful with whom you talk about it. Most people won't understand it. Okay, last thing is not to use awakening for anything else, right? It's not a skill set. It doesn't make you better at doing other things. But there is this sort of energetic surge, like suddenly all this newfound energy, because you're not squandering it on all these mental arguments with yourself. There's also the sense of having the shackles taken off, like sense of being beyond harm, being, powerful in a sense. And that can be misinterpreted. So there have been more than a few spiritual teachers who have had a genuine awakening, and then get seduced by, well, there's all kinds of beliefs to be seduced by, but one that's particularly dangerous is, I am now awake, therefore what I do is perfect or right. No, you may be awake, but your opinions before you were awake, are no, the ones after awakening are no better than the ones you had before. They're just opinions, right? Just another thought, right? Again, awakeness is what's knowingly present of whatever that thought process happens to be. So it doesn't, just waking up doesn't make you a whiz at something else. I mean, it doesn't allow you to, solve differential equations. If you couldn't sing before awakening, you can't sing afterwards. It's just awake. That's what it is. And so this, what we're talking about here is just being present for that awakeness. That's what's being asked for. Just that, sort of lingering there often, right? Loitering in awakeness. Without wanting anything, without rejecting anything, without demanding anything, without holding anything. Not for any purpose other than to become more and more familiar with being that. So it's sort of like, finding yourself inside the sanctuary. And yet not being able to see very far yet. Sanctuary is complete, but as a more dense body mind, it will just take some time to see it in more of a completeness. The Sufis call it the Dazzling Dark, right? Dazzling and yet mysterious. We can experience it, we can live from it, but we will never know it. And we can relax in that. We can learn to live from that, as that. More will happen, but more will happen more easily by just resting and allowing that awareness to work its magic. And we won't even know how it's doing that. But it knows what it's doing. We can trust that.